Thank you, everyone, for attending. We certainly appreciate your attending today, and we also appreciate and understand the concerns that we have received from our constituents, customers, and some of the communities that we serve. Please understand, we take these things very seriously. You know, one of the things that we have built the system's reputation on, and that we strive to do at all times, is provide water of unquestionable quality. And so it's really regretful that this has been experienced by some customers in some of our municipalities downriver. However, I think it's really important to clearly state that while we are working on or worked on the aesthetic issues with the water has been safe to drink 100% of the time, as confirmed by all of our testing. So I think it would be helpful so that everybody understands why you can taste or smell or see something in the water and yet it's safe to drink. And it really goes to I think a fundamental understanding of what EPA does in setting regulatory standards. Lots and lots of health effects research going on all the time. And that health effects research really lends itself to the development of what we call primary drinking water standards. Those are the regulated standards. They're safe levels that are set based on a national set of guidelines for what safety means. In each community then, they monitor for it, they test for it, they produce results. Those results are reported to regulatory agencies. They're enforceable. At all times, GLWA strives to overachieve those standards, and the vast majority of the time, we overachieve all those standards. I can't remember the last time we didn't meet a standard. Those are primary drinking water standards. Those are the ones that have health effects kinds of consequences. We also have what are called secondary standards, and these are really guidelines that are published by EPA, and they relate to things like taste and odor and color. And if you think about it in the environment, things that we ingest all the time have taste, odor, and color. That doesn't mean that they're a health issue. There are things that can be in water, which can also have taste, odor, or color, but normally we remove all of those. Even though they're not a health effects issue, we remove all of those through our treatment and we manage them. We don't expect to have taste, odor, and color in our drinking water. And we certainly don't want taste, odor, or color in our drinking water. But nonetheless, that doesn't change the fact they are not a health effects issue. And we wanted to make sure, as we looked through this incident, as we did our evaluation of what happened, that we could understand what happened and why it happened and eliminate the cause, which we have done. We'll explain to you how that occurred, and that we enhanced all of our monitoring of the primary drinking water standards to make sure that we could assure public safety through this entire time frame. And we sent samples out for secondary analysis so that we could see whether or not we had secondary contaminants present. And so, when we're here today, we'll walk through all the initial steps we took, the timeline of all that happened, and et cetera. And everything we've done since Wednesday night when we got the first reports of water quality issues in some of our communities, the conclusions that we reached from all the testing that's done, and the actions that we've taken to resolve the problem. And so we'll give you that full, that full explanation. And then, I think what's important to understand is that the root cause of the taste and odor issue has been corrected. The aesthetic issues have been resolved. And there's been no public health safety issue through this event. And at this time, I just want to, again, just reintroduce Cheryl Porter. She's our Chief Operating Officer. She has responsible charge of the drinking water system, which includes our 5 drinking water plants and our transmission system that delivers water safely to each of our customer communities. So Cheryl, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Sue, and thank all of you for being here today to give us this opportunity to explain this particular event. Now I'm going to get up and move around just a little bit just so that you can understand what we're talking about. So I'd like to open up this with a comment. When it comes to water treatment, it's a complex science process. It involves chemistry, microbiology, and lots of training. This is a representation of the entire treatment process from the time we are pulling that water off the river and bringing it in to our water treatment plants and processing it until we have a finished product that can be distributed. This is a lot to talk about. We have a very short window and we want to give you time for your questions. So I'm just going to point out 3 key areas that are involved in this particular situation. First off, we have our river intake flow that comes in to our screen chamber, which is the first starting point of the treatment process. That's where we're going to get an initial reading of what kind of water is coming in, and we're going to adjust our treatment to make sure that we are exceeding that exceptional water quality that we're looking for. The next area I would like to point out is sedimentation. Sedimentation is the place where we allow the chemical with the water that we are intaking to mix, and as it mixes, it needs time to settle out all of that particulate, and as that particulate settles out, it can continue on for treatment. Well, because there is a sedimentation at the bottom of the sedimentation basin, we have to clean that periodically to make sure that we're ensuring water quality, and that's done twice a year. So that means we take out a basin, we clean it, and that process involves us draining off of all those solids and that water into this next area, which is the residuals, what we refer to as the residuals processing area. Now, this area of the plant was newly installed in 2012. The installation of this allows us to take that solid material, and instead of just sending it down the drain, which can have an impact on the wastewater treatment systems, it allows us to do some processing ourselves so that they don't have to take that additional flow. In processing, the water off the top of that cleaning could and is being sent back to the head of the plant that mixes with the raw water, and it goes through the entire treatment process again. Okay? What we've discovered as we look at this, our timeline and the situation. So on January 11th, we got 2 phone calls from 2 communities saying we have an odor in our water. We followed our normal operating protocol, which is to dispatch our water quality team. They collect samples, they analyze them, they ensure the quality of the testing. Once we received those complaints and had the results of those testing, we noted on January 12th there was an escalation of calls, specifically 10 calls from 7 different communities, and we recognized that looking at those communities, all those communities were served by this Southwest treatment plant. So on the very next day, we were dispatching a team to help with the investigative portion at the water treatment plant, along with continuing our sampling and testing for all of the customer complaint calls that we received. One of our operating protocols, whatever you start at last, that's the first place you start. And what we observed is that they were in the midst of a basin cleaning. So the sedimentation basin, they were in the process of cleaning that, and that was immediately stopped. Once stopping that, we have the treatment capability to deal with taste and odor through adding powdered activated carbon. So our carbon system was initiated as soon as we stopped the basin. And then we began to do an investigation at the water treatment plant to isolate, eliminate, and try to figure out what is the source of this taste and odor. Again, confirming that all of our sample tests that we got back, whether it was from our residents or within the treatment process, they met all safety standards. So we extended our investigation. On the 13th, we also had communications with our regulatory agency, MDEQ. We conferred with them, we advised them of the situation. They gave us advice of some additional testing that they wanted us to do. We did do that testing, and those results will also be in the report that will be out next week. And again, all of those samples came back within parameters. We continue to do our analysis and investigation. We began to see the decrease in the turbidity, which is that component that we measure for, that particulate that initially comes in with the raw water. We get a measurement called turbidity in NTUs. So that helps us again to know where we start with our treatment process. We also issued notices, public notices. All of those are in red. Because of the frequency of the calls still coming in, we wanted to address the system, and the best way to address the system was to start flushing. So on the 17th, we went out into our system and started pulling that taste and odor out of the system to ensure that that was no longer something that our customers were experiencing. After flushing and identifying the principal cause, which I'll get to in a moment, we are currently at a state where we have reduced our carbon feed, and we have been in communications from the onset of our flushing program with our customer communities to offer our assistance to whatever they would like to do as far as flushing in their system. So let's talk about the cause a little bit more. That takes us to this board. So we talked about that river intake flow and that initial measurement of turbidity that we get that helps us to identify where to start with our treatment process. So this graph could have been 2 graphs, but in order for us to make it easy to communicate, we put it on 1 graph. I want to make it clear that the green line, which is the EPA effluent standard, and our internal standard apply to the gray line at the bottom. And our requirement, it says that we need to be below that line. The water that we receive is our river, our source. That can have fluctuations in it. And those fluctuations have no regulations that they are bound to. We can receive the water however it is received. It's our responsibility to meet treatment objectives. So when we look at this particular situation, we looked at the start of the month for the Southwest treatment plant, and we noted that the NTUs, which is the measurement for turbidity, was between 20 and 40 during that time. We engaged in our basin cleaning on January 7th, and as you can see, as we proceeded to continue with that cleaning, we have this spike of turbidity. As we correlated this information with our customer calls, this is how we were able to conclude that this was the source of our taste and odor complaints. Again, an aesthetic issue. And I'm going to pause and take a sip of water. Sorry. So, maybe your question is, why didn't we see it? Our EPA standard for turbidity says that we are not allowed to go above the green line, ever. GLWA's objective is to overachieve the standard, so we have set an internal standard for ourselves that we don't want to exceed above 0.1. So the operators, as they were looking at their data for the effluent flow, and that is the water that has gone through the entire treatment process and is now being distributed into the system, going to our customer communities. At no time did it exceed our internal standard. The basin cleaning and the escalation of calls are associated, which allowed us to conclude that that was our source. And we began to do all of the necessary things in order to mitigate and correct that situation. So now I'm going to walk you through your packets. Excuse me, Sue. So as I stated before, turbidity is a spike that we feel resulted in the odor complaints, but at no time was there a health risk. We have put correction actions in place. Not only have we stopped cleaning the basin, we will no longer, or we are suspending this effort in cleaning the basins until we can make sure that we do not create this situation again. So as we turn to our packet, one of the questions that we've gotten often is, what are you testing for? That's what this packet is. Sue spoke earlier about the primary requirements. These are the regulations. These are the things that we have to test for. In blue, it will tell you what the requirement is. So I will tell you, not only are we generating those tests, we are monthly reporting those results to DEQ, and this is available upon request. We have secondary standards. Again, guidelines, goals that we want to meet because we know that that would make our water more pleasing to our customer base. Not requirements, not enforceable. Just to give you an example, this is a lot of information, and I want to walk you through just a couple of examples of what we do, because the frequency on this testing does vary. So on page 1, if we were to look at chlorine, that's something that we're looking at and taking results or doing testing for every hour. If we were to turn to the next page and look at fluoride, that's something that we test for every 4 hours. If we looked at E. coli along with total coliform on the next page, that's something that we're collecting samples for every 2 hours, and it's something that it takes 24 hours for us to get a result back. On the last page, if you look for turbidity, that is something that we're looking at on an every hour basis at the water treatment plant. And all of that number, all of that information is consolidated and summarized on a monthly basis and sent to the state. We have the secondary requirements. As an example on here, pH, and that's something that we measure every 8 hours. Again, not enforceable, just a guideline. Also, what we've included in your packet, all of the customer complaint calls where we received sample and did the analysis, that is included on this document here. Since we received complaints that were associated with a sulfur smell, we wanted to see if we can find that, measure that in our samples. So we did send out our samples to a third-party lab, and we thank Jeff for being here from Paradigm Labs, and we did get the results for that. So that's what's also in your packet. And again, at no time was there anything detected, but we do recognize that people have certain sensitivities, and that sometimes what we can't measure doesn't mean it doesn't exist for that person. We also have all of our boards included in the packet as well. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Sue.
Well, Jeff, I think maybe if you could just say what Paragon did and what, if anything, you were able to determine from your analytical results.
Yeah, no problem.
Could you say your name and title again?
Jeff Raymond, I'm the science officer at Paragon Laboratories.
Raymond, R-A-Y-M-O-N-D?
Correct. Our primary investigations were into hydrogen sulfide and sulfide ions. We found on 6 different samples sent to us all on the 17th that the amount of hydrogen sulfide and sulfide ions usually associated with the eggy smell that most people will talk about were all well below the detection limit, significantly so. Specifically, the threshold for most people being able to smell it would be roughly 1,000 to 10,000 fold higher than what we were able to assess. So there's no evidence of sulfurous compounds being within the water that was delivered to us.
Now, that said, I think what we want to recognize is that there's certainly published literature out there that establishes that there is a small percentage of the population that is able to detect well below the analytical detection limit. So we are not calling into question whether or not there was a taste or odor in the water. We're not calling that into question at all. But I think it is a part of why, although we serve nearly 1 million people in the communities that we're referencing, we had around 100 complaints. So this is, I think, just indicative of the fact that if not but for those calls, we likely would not have known that we had an issue. It wasn't detected in effluent, it wasn't detectable in any of the analytical tests, but we would not have known. So again, this is not in any way to minimize the issue. We want at all times, every single one of the customers that we serve in every community to have water that is not just safe, but 100% palatable as well, unquestionable quality. And so we actually appreciated being called to our attention by the public that was getting something less than what they felt was normal experience for them. So with that, certainly we're here today. We want to be absolutely transparent to what happened here. We want everybody to understand what happened. From day one, our charter is to be collaborative with our communities, and so we were working with them through this process. We will continue to work with them to look at sort of an after-event analysis. Are there things that we could have done differently in communication or coordination. We always want to look for improvement opportunities, and we have some of those scheduled events coming up. Certainly, we believe that this has certainly been resolved in the GLWA system. We, again, as Cheryl noted, we've been working with our customer communities about whether or not any of them feel that it's necessary to flush their systems in any areas based on the nature and types of complaints they've had. Most of the communities have indicated at this point that they don't have a need. A few have flushed, and we're working with them. But certainly, though we believe the issue is resolved, if there's any resident out there in one of these communities who thinks they're still detecting something, they should contact their local community with those concerns. You know, we have a long history of providing very high quality water from these facilities, and some of the best quality in the nation. We have some of the best source water in the nation, and so this is certainly something that we take very seriously and that we don't want it to be repeated. So we're being very cautious about what we do moving forward. Even though this is an aesthetic effect and not a public health effect, for us it's reputational. And we want to make sure that everyone understands what the nature of the event was, but that also we've taken steps to mitigate it as quickly as we could, to thoroughly investigate it, and to provide assurance to the public that we have controls in place that it will not happen again.